Awesome. So I think first, thank you very much for having us. I have a really esteemed group of people up here today, and I get the chance to actually talk to someone else rather than me talking to myself. So this should be a really good session. Yeah, I think you've heard a lot about AI. You've heard a lot even from board members how they look at it. We have a board member here. I think you'll get some great insights on this. One thing I would say is, as we're navigating AI today, what's becoming apparent, even as someone in a company who runs this segment, that the bottom-up approach is not going to get us to the next step. Just building use cases isn't the way to go anymore. So I think what we want to do is understand a little bit how we navigate this roadmap, how companies are truly vested or investing in this space, and how do we get people excited to actually change the way they work when it comes to this process. So with that, let me do this. I'll ask our panelists to introduce themselves. So I'll start with Shah. And then as you're introducing yourself, maybe some key highlights from your side that you're seeing in your area.
Okay. By the way, this was not scripted. So in a form of introduction, my name is Shah Nawaz. I work for Regeneron. I oversee their digital transformation intent. It's a pretty broad term. We're still trying to figure out what that is. But one of the fortunate job I have is I get to work across the value chain from all the way from research to manufacturing. And I think we have heard similar themes that, how do you start looking into these technology? So one fundamental function I have is how do you create an operating system for that next, right? And we call that the bio next as a whole, because and I think Vijay also touched on that is, there's people side to it, there's a process side to it, there's a whole adoption side to it. And how do you fundamentally start to look at new modalities, and how do you carry some of the business processes forward? So that's where I spend most of my time.
Yeah, thank you, Shah. I'll come back to you in a second. Meghna?
Fantastic. Great to see you all. I was here last year. So just by introduction, I recently left my job at Verizon. I was heading up the AI practice. I've mostly spent about 25 years of my career building these kind of practices. I spent 12 years in CPG industry when models used to be mostly logistic regression. And then I was in retail at Target for a decade and built the data science practice and those kind of things. And then at Verizon, it's called the AI Center. And at the heart of my job at Verizon, I can talk about it a lot, but I spoke about it last year, and I'll just refresh your memories that, I believe that, it's not one model or it's not one thing. So we always seek for this model convergence. So how do you make sure that all of these intelligence that you're building can connect? We put a lot of emphasis on, how do you make sure explainability and responsible AI is built in? How do you make sure that you built the feedback, the experimentation and measurement of these things built in, and then also just kind of reusability. So that was the foundation. Like I said, I just exited, but really a great experience. So with that, I'll pause here and pass it to Marcello.
Yeah, awesome. And then last but not least, Marcello.
Yeah, Marcello Damiani. I'm currently senior partner at Flagship Pioneering, focusing on AI, digital, and operations strategy. And mainly Flagship is a VC that create companies. We have around 40 plus companies, currently 14 billion in asset management. Prior to that, I was the chief digital and operational excellence at Moderna. Started as a very small startup, and when I left, we were 6,000 people. And before that, I was in the high-tech industry at Motorola and early career in the aerospace industry. And what's common, I would say, to all this is I was always involved in business transformation and how you use technology to do business transformation. And I think AI is no different from the prior transformation. First, we called them IT, then process, then digital, and now we have AI, this powerful engine that can help us really change the way we do business. And I'm seeing that happening more and more. not one single new company that we create is not using AI at the core today. And that's really becoming the norm.
Yeah, and I think you're hearing that across all of the folks you heard earlier today. So let me start with the question for Shah over there. Regeneron, great company, heavily in the biotech space. When you talk about the value chain, how do you apply AI across the value chain? And where do you see kind of the ROI being pulled out?
So it's a great question. I wish I had all the answers, but I can give you some practical. I always tell, I know 1,000 ways of not, how not to do AI in a way, but it may sound very basic, but if you can't get people to understand the implication of it, everything falls apart. And this is all the way from CEO down to the level, somebody who's writing code. Half my background is software development, but education has been a big part of what we have done. Matter of fact, we spent the first year, and although in biotech, machine learning and deep learning, all these concepts are not new, but especially since the advent of generative AI, it sort of got to the board level, right? So now, our position, our challenge was, we're dealing with scientists, we're dealing with researchers who are already deep down into these things, but then you have board members all of a sudden saying, hey, what does this fit in? So we thought about this, while OpenAI and all these things were emerging, we said, hey, what is that first thing we have to do? And it may sound very table stake, but how do you educate your board members? How do you educate your C-suite? How do you educate your CFOs? How do you educate the decision-making parties, right? Now, why it's important? Well, if your CFO doesn't understand the value proposition, you're not getting the funding because depending on how you're organized, right? And if your board doesn't believe in, most of the funding, how it gets allocated, and somebody talked about that, right? So that was one part of it. The second is, which we don't, I think we did touch on this earlier, is upskilling. Now, upskilling is pretty broad, but you have hired these folks, to do X, Y, Z for years. Now, with these advances of technology, and this, by the way, does not just necessarily apply to AI as a whole, but when we saw the evolution of people going to cloud, we have heard the story of it's yet another data center, right? So we should be able to take these people and apply it there, but it was fundamentally different. How do you upskill these people to adapt these things? So there was concentrated on, how do we think about these investments? But then, I think one of the biggest thing, we and some of you may have already mentioned this earlier, is we were very conscious and mindful that we have to open this up to the larger community as a whole, right? And I know a lot of folks may have already adopted similar strategies. So as OpenAI and other became available, we created a very generalized, interface for people to take that on, how they want to use it. And lastly, which may come across as a counter, that we talk about responsible AI, and yes, it's a lot about governance, but we look at governance in twofold. One is, yes, the risk mitigation, how you think about the data, how you think about who's developing the model, and how you're going to IP, working with lawyers and legals and so forth. But governance, I think, is also, to us, is how do you make sure we're making the right investment and we're moving the right direction, which is actually going to impact the company. So I think these, like I always tell people, when generative AI came in, the first thing we kept getting was, there's a lot of hallucination, and what do we do about that? And it took us some time, and the position we took, we said, hey, the way you need to look at hallucination is a feature. And think about that, right? Okay? It's a feature. And it took a while for people to get it what we meant. And don't get me wrong, we're still working on a lot of how do we manage toxicity and all that thing. But the moment you start shifting the dialogue on how you start thinking about it, because if a technology is there to give you the next best action for something, okay, it is a feature. Okay, it may not give you the right thing, but it is giving you something that you can take on to augment, right? So these are some of the things we've been doing.
Awesome. Meghna, maybe in your experience in the last 20 odd years, going through this journey. Perhaps an example of a case that you did and both expected and unexpected results. How did you, get that across, and what did you see through the case that you did?
So I think I'll talk about personalization because you can talk to anybody and everybody has their own definition of personalization in every company that I've talked to, every team. We were working on it at Target. And you can think about your classic recommender system algorithms that people who bought this, that kind of simple thing. But I think personalization is still a very young pursuit, but it's also, it's one that has generated revenue. It has returns. It's a proven part of AI, because I deal with a lot of where's the return? Personalization actually generates sales. You can speed up that shopping decision that, you bought this last month, buy it again. You go to your Amazon cart and it's all there. So they set that, template. Netflix set that template for streaming. And so it's all set up. So we implemented that at Target. When I arrived at Verizon, I started to, poke around, what do we do for personalization? And it's like, oh yeah, we've solved that. And I was like, no, you don't. And, and I'm like, okay, if a customer has a billing problem and they go to the app and they try to figure out why is my bill so high, and then while they're on the app, they call you, can all that context in real time just be available to the agent on the app? That switching of context in session, that's the personalization I want to see. And then if that person goes to the store because neither the app or the agent can help you, I have the same information. And if I dropped off on the app looking at my bill, when I walk into the store, you say, oh, you were trying to pay your $50 amount due, I can do that in seconds, right? That saves time. We talked about it this morning, is if personalization can save time, that's the kind of work I want to do. And that's still kind of a pursuit. We've made progress in the time I was there. We actually, think about the model architecture we use is we have a lot of expert systems. So you can understand products, you can understand billing, you can understand all the experience. But behind the scene, these experiences are learning from each other. So it's a largely connected model architecture. But it's an ongoing pursuit, right? Because you have to connect it with call center, call transcripts, image search, all of these things. Yeah. So that's an example. I'll just pause there.
Gotcha. Marcello, you've worked in one of the most recognizable companies in the last 4 years, Moderna. You are now at Flagship, which is arguably either number one or number two in the investment community for biotech companies. I come from biotech, so we have a lot in common. When you think about applying AI and the body of work you did, not just at Moderna, now sitting on the outside looking at it when you're investing, how do you measure the value? Because you are in the process of actually doing startups, buying startups who do nothing but AI.
Yeah, and well, I just want to add on the personalization. It not only can help with the retail space, but in our industry, it can help with save people's life. And in oncology, you have now, and Moderna is leading a program on phase 3 on oncology, where you create a medicine for an individual person, and there's an AI engine inside it to predict what medication we need to do to that person. So personalization is key. But to go back to your question, the value. So what I've seen in recent years, the 8 years at Moderna and now 1 year at Flagship, is that first we started to see Brownian movement. Everyone is doing AI, many use cases, it's all over the place. And suddenly there is some issue bubbling up on what are we doing with those AI? Are they useful? Are they helping the company or hurting the company? Are we putting the right investment in that AI and so on? So to be able to manage the value, we needed to put a framework on how we assess the use cases. But before assessing use cases, you need to define a strategy. It's like anything else, you need to start with really the vision that we want for the company. And for that vision, you need all the leaders of the company to understand how AI can change that vision. So we had to go and train all the people in the company, created an AI academy at Moderna, but doing it as well in my new role, where you train everyone on AI, put them in a room to understand how you build use cases for AI, making sure as well that they understand AI don't solve every single issue in the company, that there are other tools than AI, maybe sometimes much cheaper than AI, to solve some of the problems, that you need to put them in the context of your strategy, your processes, and change those where it makes sense and where it generates the highest value for the company. And that's what I'm trying to do with the 40-plus companies, build that strategy rather than going Brownian and suddenly you have plenty of AI tools, some very useful, but some at all. And the investment need to be focused really on what matters to those companies.
So, Shah touched a little bit about this, and you just mentioned it. So I think you also heard it earlier. A lot of companies are just going gangbusters, right? Maybe a little bit, and I'll ask this, essentially each of you to talk about this a little bit on how you've seen this. AI literacy programs, education, educating executives. There are companies that have done really good data literacy programs, but what are you seeing? I think going into a CEO suite and saying, I want to do AI because it's going to be faster, cheaper, better is one way. Or you go in and say, here's how I educate, as Marcello said, at Moderna. What are you seeing, Shah, at Regeneron?
So at least what I can share with you, what is that we're doing, what's working, at least what has worked is, part is, and I mean, you sort of cannot take the data out of the AI conversation, so we're sort of latching on to, and I'm sure a lot of us have tried this data centricity and notion or data literacy and so forth. But I mean, and not speaking from a Regeneron perspective, but in general, I think we're still learning what does it really takes to be a data-centric organization, right? How do you move the organization from an output to outcome based? How do you move the organization from what you do to truly digital? And I bring these notions for fundamental reasons. One is, so when we're working with either the developer community or even our GNA community or research community, everyone is trained on a certain thing, certain way, and they have been doing for decades, even longer than we have. That's how they've been trained. That's how they know it. Either that's a molecular biologist or bioinformatician or somebody who's analyzing structural biology or preclinical or how we do clinical trial. So they've been trained. Now you're going in with a point of view as to how this could be done differently, right? So what we're starting to do is very grassroots, as to see. Okay, let's just say, in the area of, let's say, a pure clinical trial side of the house, we spend a lot of time just trying to understand how do we assess the sites, how do we qualify the sites, how do we go about recruiting the patients. Now, these are not transformational per se, but we rely on a lot of analytics, right? Can we augment that, and can we bring that into the workflow? So again, little things in the clinical side. If in the research side of the house, now we're not scientists, but if we need to influence, there's a notion of target discovery. How do we identify targets, right? And that cycle could be from 9 to 12 months, depending on what target therapeutic area we're going after. But can you augment that little step? In the imaging side, we spend a lot of time trying to understand the imaging data, just where the data is coming from. Basic techniques like how can we annotate this, how can we segment that so that they can start to analyze that. So it still seems very narrow. I mean, you can put this in a narrow category, but that's to build a momentum and how you start thinking about it. Now, then we are taking some more radical approaches, which again, it could put us at risk. Like, for example, in the case of patient recruitment. Now, we buy a lot of data to make sense out of, where we can actually get the patient. Or so we say, hey, can we go after the public sources to help identify, and do we need all this, and can we augment that intelligence? So again, it's been a very grassroots type momentum we've been building. Now we have enough, I think just in the generative space, we have over 200 use cases. Now, outside of this, we have also created, we call it the artificial pressure within the organization, right? So how do you create an artificial pressure across the organization? So we end up building what we call it the AI registry. It's like a little, you can think of it just as a web page where everyone is putting their use cases, and we're actually showing visibility across the organization, how many use cases are actually in development, how many have gone in production. Now, what this has done overnight is just a matter of 6 months. We started with like 20, 30 use cases. Now we got over 200 use cases. Out of those 200 use cases, at least 5 or 6 are in production. Now that's actually getting people thinking about it, right? Now, it's a, I know we talk about change management, but this is a whole change management exercise which is going on across the organization. I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, very much so. Marcello, to you for a second. Funding is a hot topic in all of this, right? So I like to say if I had $1, I'd put, even today, I would put probably 70 cents on my core, 20 cents on adjacency, and maybe 10 cents on all this fancy AI stuff. How do you convince the CEO to flip that a bit with where we're going?
Yeah, and I think this is still to be discussed at the board and with the CEOs, because not every CEO is equal, I would say. Some CEOs understand fully the impact of technology and the impact of AI on their business, and how they invest in that business. Some other are more traditional, and you need more convincing and working with them. And that's the question I asked before, is some of them are very ambitious on wanting to use AI, but very shy when it comes to put the money. And I think what matters is you go back to the strategy and educate them around, this is how AI is going to change the industry. And I more than often take the insurance industry as an example, and I don't know if you know that example, where some insurances based on AI, they select the best clients, and they offer them the best pricing. And not only that attract those best clients, but it gives the other clients to their competitor, which are the worst clients. And I tell them this is going to happen in every industry. It's not only the insurance industry. And try to convince them through those examples on how AI is changing the world, and give them example internally on how we can use AI to improve what we are doing. And there are many examples nowadays that you can use to help the CEO understand the impact on AI and what they do. And hence now many or all of the companies that we create, their AI is embedded from the get-go.
Last question to you, Meghna. Talent, hiring, reskilling. So there's always a hot topic about reskilling. Can you reskill someone to go to these places? I have my own opinions on it. They're probably not popular, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on the type of talent and how do we, evolve to where most of these companies need to look out 15 years. And it almost seems like many of us, my company included, we're looking out 2 years. We're not looking out 15. So, you heard about generative AI. And I've said this to one of my colleagues. And when it first came out, there was a lot of excitement. Then it was like a hammer looking for nails. Because we ran around saying, yeah, we can do this. Yeah, we can do this. Now I think we've calmed down and we have some succinct, but we had to find the talent to actually work on that.
Yeah, and I'll draw on what worked for me at Verizon. we were hiring in the middle of pandemic. There were freezes and all that. But it also changed what market you could go to.
Yeah.
So what worked for me was I only hired like less than a dozen people that I really wanted there. Like just very key quality over quantity. And I used that as a change management strategy. I want to point to Vijay's slide that had the dots. In the middle was operating model, and then it had vision, talent, education, tech ecosystem, and IP, and know-how. You did it independently, but that's how you have to think about it all, because if you plan for all of these things, you will get the education, you will get the talent upskilling happening. We actually did an exercise right after ChatGPT came out to think about what does that mean for data scientists? Like, are we going to be hiring the same kind of talent 3 years down the road? Like typically somebody in my role would have hundreds of data scientists. Is that what you should be hiring for? Or do you need more architects and engineers and all these hybrid jobs? So these jobs also have to change. But I do believe in upskilling. You will need a small % of people who are like really out there thinking 10, 15 years. But you also want people who are focused on the next 2 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Because my job was all about operationalizing what we were building.
Yeah.
So you need to stay a lot more in that like 2 to 5 year trajectory as well.
Yeah, I mean, Rockwell's been on a digital transformation for a number of years, and I would echo we're probably about 60% through, and maybe we've slowed down to now into the single-digit percentages. But my sense is part of this is we use the term change management. I like to use the term ways of working.
Yeah.
Because it's really transforming people on how they work from what they do today to what they're likely to do tomorrow.
Yeah.
And convincing them that the way tomorrow is better than the way today. And I think, it's not easy, but the excitement of all of the new technology is what gets people excited about coming.